Good morning. Welcome to Ask the Experts, an award-winning daily series from 8:30 to 9 a.m. to help small businesses. If you have any questions, please ask them in the comments of the live feed. If you need any more advice, join the official Intuit QuickBooks SMB community group on Facebook. Accountants and business experts are on hand 24/7. Now, during the live session, we'll be running a poll. So please do engage with it, and I'll reveal the results at the end. So who am I? I'm Jamie Fraser. I'm the CEO and founder of 996 Solutions. My background is as a lawyer. I was a commercial lawyer for 15 years. It started out in private practice in city firms like Freshfields and then Arnold and Porter. And then I've worked in-house as well at IBM and Smiths Group, which is a FTSE 100 business. But for the last 5 years, I've been working in this field of legal operations, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. But so right now, I have two hats. I'm still a practicing lawyer, and I work with a firm called Jurit, and Jurit is a boutique virtual law firm. And so there, I'm advising startups and SMEs on kind of commercial and corporate matters. My other hat, like I say, is I run a legal operations consultancy, 996 Solutions, which I set up in February of last year, so a month before the pandemic, which was not ideal timing, maybe. But, you know, I've been very lucky and been kept very busy and have had some great clients, currently working with Google. I've worked with Williams Advanced Engineering, Swiss Investment Bank, and others. And so legal operations is really about this focus on within the legal function, the kind of concepts of people, process, technology, and data. So the name 996 Solutions comes from this kind of Chinese expression of working 996. So you can't work 24/7. It's kind of impossible. People talk about it. But in China, they talk about working 996, 9 till 9, 6 days a week. And someone like Jack Ma from Alibaba, he credits this kind of work ethic with, you know, what's made China the technology powerhouse it is today. But you know, 996 is not a happy way to work, frankly. And so I'm kind of talking to legal departments and general counsel and saying, you need to work more efficiently, you need to work smarter. And that's kind of what I'm here to help with. So today's question, meant to be mildly provocative: why does my business even need a lawyer? And I kind of hear this from people, startups and SMEs. And, you know, I think lawyers and the legal profession can get a bit of a bad name. And sometimes maybe they give themselves a bad name. You know, the kind of department for saying no, this kind of role as policeman or enforcer, it's not a great image, I don't think. I like to think about law as kind of covering two big areas. I like to split the world in two always. This idea of protecting value and enhancing value. So protecting value, definitely. There's a huge bit here around compliance and regulation. And since the financial crisis of 2008, there's been an incredible increase in the volume of regulation. And that's whether that's data protection, whether it's new ESG issues. There's just more and more around. And I think sometimes, you know, this really fundamental point of I keep the directors out of jail. It's a kind of weak argument sometimes, but it can potentially be powerful in the right situation. Other times when the company's kind of under attack effectively is in litigation. You know, someone's bringing a claim against the company, and that can cause real financial or reputational damage. And so this kind of, you know, legal can certainly help to protect in those situations. I think a more kind of positive aspect is when you've set up a business and you've built a brand and you maybe have designs, then I think registering that intellectual property is really important. And that's certainly something, this kind of asserting ownership over your brand names or designs, that's kind of protecting this value that you've created as a business owner. But I think the other side is where I think is really interesting. And it's this idea of how do we as lawyers help to enhance the value and to really kind of grow the business. You know, and it comes down to the fundamentals. What is the strategy of the business? And you know, you potentially as a founder or the CEO of a business, you've got the experience, you might have done an MBA yourself, and so you might think, well, strategy is not really a legal skill, but I think a good lawyer has this kind of level of commercial awareness and hopefully common sense as well. It's kind of useful voice to have in those strategy discussions. But then I think when it goes to the next step of how do you execute against that strategy, then that's where legal really comes into play, where you're developing new products, you're entering new markets, it kind of down to the level of contracting. So your terms and conditions, are your contracts enforceable? Are they useful? Are they reasonable? You don't want to be so unreasonable that you're fighting about them every single day. You then also get into the kind of bigger areas of, your business is really growing, and we're talking about acquisitions, we're talking about mergers, joint ventures. Those are real kind of core areas where your in-house lawyer, your external lawyer should really be able to add value. I think one of the key areas as well I'd like to focus on as well is talking about one of the company's biggest assets, which is people. And so both of these ideas of protecting value and enhancing value apply to people. And under protecting value, it's kind of, the various things that you need to have in place. So kind of policies, your employment terms, the kind of the issues around confidentiality and non-disclosure agreements or NDAs. These are really critical. So we're kind of protecting company secrets. But then also more positively as well, your employees really enhance the value in the business. And so these ideas of how you attract new recruits, how you reward them and keep them, and how you train them and improve them. I mean, those are all areas I think where legal can help. So it kind of comes to this idea of, well, why is it even a question of why and when you need a lawyer involved? And I think maybe it's on us as lawyers. We need to be more commercial and more engaged. And the idea that you'd ever get a memo or an email from a lawyer that's got a reference to case law or statutes, I think is certainly something that should be removed. We should stamp that out. And I certainly had one business person who I dealt with who said he was completely allergic to Latin. And I don't think I've seen much Latin in any legal advice for some time. But that's the kind of thing we need to get away from. We need to be more proactive and really kind of think ahead, I think, to issues coming down the line. And that might be ESG, kind of environmental, social, and governance concerns, or it might be new technology concerns as well. So if you're interested in these topics, this is stuff that I do, whether it's writing and negotiating contracts, that's what I do with Jurit, whether it's putting in place new policies or maybe technologies as well, like contract management, then that's something I do through 996 Solutions. So I'll be kind of sharing my details at the end of this, and I'd be delighted to discuss any of this further. So we're going to jump to some questions, and it's great to see that we've got some in already. So Alistair on Facebook Messenger has a question: in what ways can a lawyer help us grow the business? I'm not clear when's the right time to bring them in. I would say this as a lawyer, as soon as possible. So the kind of well, I'll flip to the other way. The worst time is kind of like when it's total crisis. You've got kind of a demand, you've got a claim in the door. That's the point when it's the fire alarm. You're scrambling to gather all the information. I think when you have a lawyer or you have your legal department involved really from the outset. So like I say, if you're developing a new technology, if you're going to a new market, then to be having those discussions so that your lawyer is already thinking, okay, we're going into somewhere, there might be some issue here. We're already thinking in advance what might happen, and also how might we mitigate that. So, the earlier, the better. And I can certainly speak for myself, but I think other lawyers are generally going to be happy to have a kind of initial discussion. And some people will do it for free, and some people do it at some kind of reduced cost, but that kind of like bit of just be confident that you can go to someone and say, hey, look, I think we've got a developing situation. and go early would be my advice. So we've got Becky on Instagram. Hey Jamie, I'm new to all this. I started a side hustle while in lockdown. Excellent. It's been quite a roller coaster, hasn't it? And now I'm thinking of turning it into an actual business. Before I make the jump from sole trader to limited company, what should I be considering from a legal standpoint? And so, Becky, this what I'm giving today, talking generally, right? So this isn't direct legal advice. I'd be very happy to pick this up with you, because there are kind of situations and circumstances, there's details that might make a difference as to what's suitable for you. But in general, absolutely, there is a big difference. It's going to be about there's a kind of element of formality, right? There's a kind of cost, and there's some time associated with setting up a limited company. It's not massive, and from my perspective, it's definitely worth doing. I mean, I think that's money that's kind of well spent. The danger is, as being a sole trader, if there's ever any issue, then it's kind of your money that someone can come after. The point of the limited company, the limited is about the assets that someone, if you put out a product and there's a problem with it, and someone comes and sues you, then with a limited company, they can only go after the assets of the company. And if you're a sole trader still, then the danger is they come after you, and they come after any of your own personal assets and money or whatever. And so it's a great piece of protection for you there. And like I say, it's not massively complicated, but I would certainly recommend it as something to investigate further. I'd be very happy to talk about it. So we've got Lloyd on Twitter. I'm thinking about expanding my business and was looking into franchising. From a legal perspective, what would this involve? So Lloyd, I'm really sorry. Actually, franchising is probably one of the few areas I've never been involved in. So I kind of hesitate to say much more about franchising. I do know I have colleagues within Jurit who I know have worked with businesses who are franchises. So yeah, happy to pick this up afterwards and to make an intro for you there. So we've got another one here. So we've got Meredith, who's on Facebook Messenger, who's asking, are there any mandatories we should be putting into our supply chain contracts? What should our termination or suspension clauses look like? And, Meredith, this is a kind of tricky one, because there's a lot of stuff that you want in there. So you want to have the kind of performance aspects. So I don't know what's being supplied to you, but you want to make sure that there are things there around kind of timing and around quality. I mean, that seems to be kind of sounds obvious, but you're paying money for things. They need to be the standards that you want from them. The termination aspects, I mean, they're kind of like to think of some very sort of standard termination provisions. But, you might have a situation where things aren't being delivered on time. It's not hitting that quality angle. That might be a reason for termination. You might also put in there as well, it's not always going to be acceptable, but a suspension clause might be something like the standard is a kind of force majeure, and force majeure just means things that are outside of both parties' sort of power. So if there's a flood, if there's an earthquake, those kind of things, those things are quite extreme for force majeure, but you can agree to have a suspension clause in there as well, which might be that if your client goes out of business, then you are able to kind of hold on the buying as well. So that might be a reason that you kind of look up and down the chain of contracts and kind of think about what impact there would be if your client that you're selling to kind of went out of business or stopped trading for a certain period. So yeah, so there's a bunch of stuff in there. Other kind of mandatories we would talk about would be things like limits of liability, and then it sounds dreadful, but the kind of the boilerplate stuff. So what law is it under? what are the kind of those kind of eventualities if there were any problems. Again, all good stuff that I love to talk about. So please, happy to pick up on that further. We've got Shelley here. This is great. There's so many questions on Instagram. Do you think NDAs are important? So I'm not sure in what situations we should be using them, and I worry some people get scared off by them. So Shelley, lawyers love talking about NDAs, and I think they're really important. But what I think is more important is that they don't get in the way of doing business. And so if you kind of have a lawyer who doesn't maybe share my view, who thinks I'm going to put this kind of cast iron NDA in place, and it's going to cover every eventuality, and it's going to, if anyone breaches it, there's going to be indemnities and there's punishing clauses that come out of it. You end up negotiating it, and exactly you're concerned that people get scared off by them. I think a good NDA is simple. It's and it's kind of expected as well. I don't think it should be a surprise to people. But at the same time, classic lawyer's answer, it depends, right? It depends what your business is. And so if your business is really built on maybe some kind of something that you haven't registered as a patent or as a design yet, and it's your business is really importantly about a kind of secret, you have a trade secret, then absolutely, like every discussion you should have an NDA in it. And typically maybe your suppliers or your clients, they're gonna be interested in maybe a mutual NDA as well, because they're going to be sharing information with you, whether that's about kind of specifications or it's about pricing. So here's the thing that's come out quite recently, and I think it's a great step forwards for NDAs. It's called One NDA. And if you look that up, it's a group of lawyers have got together in quite a progressive way and kind of collaborated, which is unusual, but brilliant. And so One NDA is this kind of agreed format for NDAs. And I think it's a brilliant idea, and it's super simple, and it just kind of says, look, this is a sort of accepted version of the NDA. We don't need to negotiate it or discuss it. Let's just get on with it. And so I think that's certainly one that I would recommend. If you look up One NDA, you should find that. Okay, so Gemma on Twitter. When it comes to one of my suppliers not delivering on a contractual obligation, what are my options? I want to avoid litigation if possible and keep cool heads, but not sure what I can and can't do. So I'm just going to grab a quick drink. So Gemma, absolutely. I'm not a litigator. I've been involved in plenty of commercial disputes, and I think this idea of reaching for the hammer every time and we're going to sue you is just a terrible outcome, because ideally, you never know, right? Is this a kind of one-off? Is there some kind of problem your supplier is having? Is this a key supplier that you want to kind of have in the future? All these kind of commercial, wider considerations come into play. I think there is something you can do though, which is, in the first place, and it's slightly after the horse has bolted, but have you got a contract in place, right? Okay, so it sounds like you talk about contractual obligations. So have you got a contract in place in the first place? So make sure that everywhere you have either an NDA or contracts in place, and then kind of go back to the contract. And that's certainly something that, your lawyers can help with, and just say, hold on, is this really a contractual obligation? To be really clear, was there a definite delivery date? Was there a definite quality specification that they're not meeting? So we're really looking at that contract to say, have they broken any aspect of the contract? So that's one thing. So is there a breach of the contract? But then also, what does that breach amount to? Like, does that mean that I can sue them? Does it mean I can terminate the contract? And so we might look at what the kind of term was in the contract. And, really at the kind of, there's a spectrum. And I think the kind of, at the very kind of friendly end is the business to business conversation. It then becomes a kind of have a lawyer involved, who then starts to whether it's an email, whether it's a letter, just kind of saying, reminding you of your contractual commitments. And although like I say, I hate referring to statutes and case law, I think when we're talking about contracts, quite happy to say, hey, look, clause 2B is a really key commitment that you've made to us, and it seems to us you're in breach of it. We're going to ask you to remedy this and point out what they have to do. And it kind of goes down that spectrum of how kind of threatening / kind of formal are we going to get. And so I think that's, but I think the starting point is right. I think this kind of jumping to litigation is not something that I would recommend. Great. So we've got a question here from Fred on Facebook Messenger. I hate this because I feel it's like I'm not sure I can really answer it. I'll just say what it is. But with furlough about to end, I wonder if you had any general advice for business owners when it comes to bringing back furloughed staff. What are our legal obligations? And so, Fred, apologies. Employment law is really not something, it's not my bag, and I'd hate to kind of be giving advice or talking about something I don't know. Again, no, I have colleagues in Jurit who are full-time employment lawyers, and in fact, I know one of them has written a piece recently that was on LinkedIn on exactly this. So if you want to drop me a note, I can certainly put you in touch there as well. So Christian on Instagram, I think it's important to do a bit of research before entering a contract with a potential business partner. How do you go about this research, and what sort of things should we be considering? I mean, Christian, the internet is just a fantastic thing, isn't it? That, you know, very simply, you can be just looking up a combination of the company name and or any of the directors. So kind of seeing, are these people who, you know, what is it? Is it kind of, is there a general positive reports about the business? Have there been any sort of, are there any clouds hanging over them previously? And you can kind of tell, and or is all the good stuff just out of their own marketing department, or actually does it come from sort of third-party sources? So that, to my mind, that kind of informal stuff is really important. That's the kind of, it's the equivalent of what you would do if you know, just kind of talking to people and saying, do you know these people? Have you, you know, do you know about their business? I think the other areas that you can do that, and I think these aren't kind of, none of this is overstepping any mark at all. I think things like LinkedIn are great places. You can start looking up who some of the business people or the directors might be, and see, you know, what kind of businesses have they been involved with before? Is this their first rodeo? That kind of thing. So I think that's really important. See, build up your sort of picture of the leadership team, the executives that might be involved in it. And I think kind of you can go down the spectrum of sort of more formal investigation. It's kind of, investigation sounds a bit kind of more like a level of intrigue than there really is. But you can look on things like Companies House. So the UK Companies House, you can search up directors there. You can see whether people have been directors of other businesses, and you can see whether they've been involved in companies that have maybe gone bankrupt. There might be good reason why companies have gone bankrupt, but it might also cause a bit of a red flag for you. So this is kind of stuff that you can do yourself. And then kind of further along the line, there are companies who can provide more in-depth investigation, who really get into the kind of compliance and regulatory piece, as well as the financial side. You know, the kind of the big ones are things like Dun & Bradstreet, who will do a real kind of financial investigation for you about the viability of a company. So there's quite a spectrum of things that you can do. But I think, you know, in my mind, there's still quite a lot you can kind of do just yourself. Okay, so I'm just kind of conscious of time. There's still some great questions here. So Harry on Instagram, in terms of trying to drive efficiencies within a legal team, do you have any processes or technologies you'd recommend? Harry, I could talk about this all day. This is, I love this stuff. So I'll kind of say the thing that we'll come to after, but technologies are quite often the thing that people are focused on. It's kind of, I love it. It's really interesting. You know, AI is going to solve all our problems, but not right yet, I don't think. And I think for most businesses, and I'm talking to startups, I'm talking to, you know, the big Swiss investment bank that I worked with, and actually process improvement is the thing that can make the biggest change. And that is this kind of coming, especially, the way I come is as an external third party set of eyes. And, my usual starting point is kind of like, why do you do it like this? Sometimes the answer is, well, I don't know, or it's because we've always done it like this. And so it's that kind of analysis of saying, okay, well, let's just take it apart a bit and see who touches this. So it's a commercial contract comes in, who looks at it, who touches it, and kind of why. And so can we improve that? Can we just make that a more efficient and streamlined process? And so when you do that, I mean, you can save time, and you can kind of say, well, is this, should the business be doing this? Should a lawyer be doing this? Either we just improve the process, or maybe we start to get other people involved as well. And so the thing that's worth thinking about as well, there are traditional law firms, and there are these new businesses, relatively new, alternative legal service providers. And they're companies like Lawyers on Demand, like Elevate. And their approach is really to look at process. That's kind of thing, very similar to what I'm doing. So how do we improve the process? And once you improve the process, you then have that kind of opportunity to maybe bring in new technology. So can we start to automate things? So can we put a kind of form in the process that you complete, and then it populates a contract? You get to things like Contract Express and other technologies like that quite quickly. So I hope that helps. There's lots of stuff to unpack in there as well. And so I think we've probably got time for one more, shall we? Let's do that. So Sam on Twitter has come through and said, when it comes to intellectual property, IP, what do we need to know? As a small business, how do we get into it? And how do we monitor to make sure no one infringes it? And so, Sam, the world of intellectual property is there's a lot in there. So let's break it down into some of the kind of the bits of it. So the key one that most people recognize is trademarks. So your kind of brand name, super important as you're growing a business, that you are able to enforce that, so that you make sure that other people aren't using it. And it gets really complicated, right? Because Polo, for example, Polo has been registered as sweets. It's registered for Ralph Lauren clothing. It's registered for Volkswagen cars. So it is possible. Just because someone has got the name, you can look up on the UK Intellectual Property Office. You can do a search there. It's a good way of kind of looking up, have people got the same name that you want to use, but also are they using it in the same category as you? So that's kind of something you can use. So that's a great resource. That's free. You can go and do that yourself. Other things that get more complicated are things like patents. So patents are about inventions. Have you made a new product that has kind of never been available before? Patents kind of get really, the process for registering them is quite complex. And certainly that's the point where I think legal advice, patent agents are really important. And then there's copyright as well. So all your written or produced materials typically will benefit from copyright protection. And there's a whole, there's a bunch of tricks and tools that you can use that make sure that you do that properly. Again, all stuff I love talking about. I'm really happy to pick any of this stuff up afterwards. So while I've been talking, there's been a poll that's been run, and I'm just laughing because it's not quite what I expected it. So we'd asked you, how often does your business need support from a lawyer? And so 0% of you said daily, 10% said weekly, 20% of you said monthly, and 70% answered, I don't. I don't need support from a lawyer. And I find I'm kind of surprised. And I think, like I said at the start, I think that's maybe a failing on the part of the lawyers like me to not explain and kind of convince you of the things that we can help you with. So I really hope that some of those 70% of people who said I don't, I hope that today's been helpful. And I hope I've kind of highlighted some areas where maybe you do need support from a lawyer. So really interesting. I find that's amazing. So really just kind of, it's for me just to say, thank you all for tuning in this morning. If you want to get in touch, please email me on jamie@996.solutions, and that's written 996, or on jamie.fraser@jurit, Jurit, jurit.com. And you can find out more about 996 Solutions at our website, www.996.solutions. So coming up on Ask the Expert tomorrow is Jenna Davis. She's a communication specialist and pitch coach at the I Am Hub. Tune in tomorrow to learn how to show up authentically for pitches and when communicating in professional settings. And just finally, a reminder that if you need any more advice, join the official Intuit QuickBooks SMB community group on Facebook. Accountants and business experts are on hand 24/7. So I've really enjoyed answering your questions this morning. Have a great day. Thank you.